Composting is easily one of the best things we can do for the planet, one of the easiest things we can do for the planet and for ourselves, and also one of the most rewarding things we can do, again, for the planet and for ourselves. It prevents our food waste from going to the landfill, and in return, we get valuable compost, which is essentially just fertilizer for free. So especially if you have a garden or you have any sort of landscaping, this is going to be extremely valuable to you, but if not, you can also just give it to friends. But there are so many options for composting, so if you have never done composting before, how do you know where to start? Which one should you choose? It depends. It depends on what your priorities are, how much time you have, what sort of land you're working with, if you have any land at all, if you're in an apartment, if you're like me in an RV. Do you want something that's quick and easy? Do you want something that can maybe take a little bit longer but have a better reward? We're going to talk about the pros and cons of all of these different ways that I've thought of we could compost. So if you have any other additional ways for composting, leave them down below. But this is all the ways that I personally thought of that we could all compost. But something I can guarantee though is that this list will include a way for every single person to compost, no matter your budget, your time, or the space that you have available to compost. Hello everyone, it's Emma and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all sorts of things zero waste, focusing on free, easy, and fun ways to live low waste and practical ways to be an activist. And I cannot believe I have never made this video before. I would love to make more composting videos, and I think I will this winter when I'm living with my mom, who has a really nice composting setup. So if you have any specific composting questions, let me know and I will answer them this winter in a full video. Particularly why we should not be sending food waste to the landfill. I think that's a really important spot to start, and you can check that out up here where we talk about what is methane, how does methane come from our food waste, and how methane is not actually created from composting. And that's a really good place to start to understand why we need to be composting and not putting our food in the landfill. So watch that video, come back, and now you're ready to pick a way to compost. As well as I really encourage you to watch this video as well about how we're actually running out of landfill space, and the more and more things that we can prevent from sending to the landfill. That's going to be a huge win for everybody, like for the planet and for ourselves. Like, what are we going to do when our landfills run out? I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get there, I suppose. This is why things like recycling and composting are really important. Let's just go ahead and jump right in. The first way to compost is curbside composting. This is easily the easiest way to compost because it's no effort on you, but unfortunately this is not accessible to a lot of people. If you do have access to it, your city should provide you with a bin. I know Spokane has green bins. I think they're green. Yeah, I think brown is typically trash, green is typically compost, and blue is typically recycling. Of course, that varies, I'm sure, by region. But your city should provide you with a bin when you move in. If you don't, and like you see your neighbors have composting bins, maybe you can look and see if there's a company written on the bin. You can give them a call, see if you can get your own bin. Some cities might charge, some cities might not. Again, this all depends. But it's really as simple as loading up your green bin every week and having the city take care of it for you. Of course, you need to check the rules on if they can take bioplastics, if they can take things like cardboard and paper, what sort of food they will and will not take. So just like with recycling, composting as well, always check the rules for your area if you have curbside composting. If you don't know if your city offers it, you can search on Google or Ecosia, something like Spokane plus composting or Las Vegas composting, whatever that may be, and it should pop up on if your city has a recycling facility or recycling program. If not, that will probably give you some other ideas later on down the list. Something else to consider here is it might only be offered in certain parts of town or with certain living conditions. And what I mean is, what I've noticed, at least in Spokane, I don't actually live in the city and I don't have a home here. I live in an RV. What I've noticed just from driving around is that only residences have composting bins. So apartment buildings don't have compost bins. There's no public compost bins. There's no compost bins for like stores and restaurants. Your area might not actually have compost if your city does. But this is the first city I've lived in that has curbside composting available, even though it's not available to everyone. Hopefully it gets to be that way someday. But I love to see steps in this direction toward offering it for free and making it super easy for people to compost. Okay, so the pros of this one is it's generally free or low cost. It's very little work on your part. The only thing you have to do is be conscious of the rules and make sure you're actually filling up your bin and not putting your stuff in the trash. And generally, commercial composting is the only place where you can successfully and safely compost bioplastics. So if your curbside composting takes bioplastics, that's a great win too. Cons to this one, it's obviously not available to every city or every town. Like if you're in a really small part, like in the rural US, you probably don't have curbside composting. And even in those cities, it's not available in every neighborhood in that city. And the other con is some regions might charge you for the bin or charge you for a pickup cost. Moving on to number 2 is a simple compost pile. So there are lots of different ways you can compost at home. This is the first one, and this is just a literal pile. This is what my mom does, and I think this was really successful for her in Ohio, a very temperate part of the US and a very humid humid part of the US, the soil in Ohio is very fertile, so like there's very little effort that comes into a compost pile in those sorts of regions. Now, had I tried to do a compost pile in Las Vegas, it probably would have solidified. I'm not even joking. There's not enough humidity in Las Vegas for a compost pile like this in a way that you're not doing anything. It's set it and forget it. Of course, if you want to put more effort into it, you can by making sure that you add all the right things, making sure you're mixing it, making sure, I don't know, that there's enough airflow and all that sort of stuff, but you don't really have to with this method. Probably the biggest con with this one is pests, because it's literally just a pile. There's no container that it's in, there's no lid. But again, with my mom, hers is far enough away from her house, and it's also on the edge of a field, so like the field is also attracting pests. So, but again, it's far enough away from her house that she hasn't seen a problem with this. So this really does depend on your space available. If you have a small yard and your compost pile would be next to your house, probably not the best idea because it might attract mice and other rodents and stuff into your house. Don't want that. As well as if you're composting correctly, and this goes with any method, if you're composting correctly at home, there won't be any smell. So it won't really matter if it's too far or too close to your house if it's done correctly. And again, that comes down to how many browns you're adding, how many greens you're adding, how much airflow is there, how much water is there, how often do you stir it, and all that sort of stuff. So if it's near your house and you don't want it to smell, be sure to follow all of those tips. And I think I outlined some more of those tips in this video. So the pros to this method is obviously it can be free. You're literally just dumping your compost on the ground. No materials required or very little cost. I think my mom found some free pallets so that she could actually like block it off and keep it from like spilling everywhere. I see pallets for free all the time on Facebook Marketplace, and you can also ask like big box stores like Walmart if they have any to get rid of. This requires little to no equipment, tools, or knowledge. Again, you can literally just set it and forget it, and it most likely will work out if you're in the right region. So therefore, this one is also not very energy intensive or time intensive on your part. Now, cons for this one. It is definitely the easiest to attract pests because it's on the ground and it's not closed in. If you want to have like a really successful fertilizer, you do have to put in some work, but like not a ton. Again, depending on your region. No lid can create some smell while the stuff is breaking down. It's not going to be 100% smell free, so keep that in mind too. And this definitely requires the most space and yard availability. Here's a quick snapshot of my backyard in Las Vegas. Even if it was a perfect condition for composting, I probably wouldn't do a pile in this yard because it's so small. And this definitely obviously isn't an option for people who are in apartments. Number 3 is to compost in an old tub or tote. This is my tried and true method for living in an apartment. It wasn't really an apartment, it was a quadplex. So there was 2 people on top, 2 people on bottom. We had a little quadrant of the yard. The space of the yard is probably the size of our RV. It was a very, very small yard, but I still wanted to be able to compost here, and I did this successfully for free in an old tub. You can check it out again up here. That video, I actually show you how I built this bin for free and also from trash. So this can be a free option, or you could go out and buy a tub. You could thrift a tub. Tubs and totes are always at Goodwill and always on Facebook Marketplace if you do want to buy one new, like with a nice snapping lid, unlike my scrap wood lid. But that's still very, very cheap. I'm sure you can find it for $5 on Facebook Marketplace or less. This is great for people who have a yard, but their yard is pretty small. This is also great for temporary tenants because obviously you don't want to put in anything permanent. If you're just renting, you probably won't even be allowed to. So this is great for me who was renting, and then when I was done, when I was moving, I just took the tub to someone who wanted to keep composting, and they took it all off my hands. There was no mess left behind for people who followed me for living in the house. And again, just like with all of these bins, you do need, the proper ratio of greens and browns and water and air to have a good yieldable compost. But again, I did this in a very humid climate. I did this when I lived in Okinawa, Japan, and I didn't do anything scientific. I just let it go, and it was really, really nice compost. Pros to this one is this is easily one of the freest and cheapest options. You can use trash and actually prevent stuff from the landfill too. This is great for renters and great for small spaces. But for cons, if you want to get a nicer pre-made bin, it will be a little bit more expensive, but of course then there's no work on your part. It might require a little bit more work to actually get yieldable, is that even a word? I keep using it. A yieldable compost because it is in such a small space. You also might run out of space if you're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. And because it's so small, I found it also was really, really hard to stir around. So that was kind of a problem, but not a big issue. Number 4 is a compost spinning bin. This was my preferred method for Las Vegas. Again, because I was renting, this was a great renter-friendly option. Though I did enjoy it for the renter-friendliness of it, I didn't like it in Vegas because these don't hold moisture very well because they're spinning and they have holes in the bottom. Now you should have drainage for all of your compost bins so that it doesn't get too soupy. In the desert, you really need it to retain that moisture, and these bins did not. Therefore, most of the stuff in there did not decompose after 2 years. It was in there for 2 years in a compost setting. And again, this is just because the desert is so dry. My smaller bin, not successful. The bigger one, very successful. And I know exactly why. The small bin had a rod in the middle, which really prevented stuff from mixing around. My bigger bin had nothing in the middle to get in the way, obstruct the spinning. So that one decomposed a lot better. So I highly recommend one like that. I found them both secondhand on Facebook Marketplace, which was great. Again, this was a a really nice way to find them for cheaper, but these bins are not cheap. I think they were each around $50, so definitely not on the budget end of the composting spectrum. But I also think this is a really good option for beginners, people who have never composted before. This is really easy to experiment with. It makes mixing it around very easy. If you don't live in a dry environment, I'm sure it will decompose very nicely. I think more accessible because you can like stand up and just spin it. It doesn't take a lot of strength or effort to spin these bins. You don't have to bend over and hunch over and dig around a lot. So pros of this one, very easy to spin and mix. I think they're great for beginners. Like I said, I found both of them secondhand, so I think you could probably find one secondhand too. They're pretty easy to find. And another one that is great for renters and great for small spaces. Now, the cons to this one is if you do buy them new, even secondhand, they can still get pretty expensive. Not great in dry climates. If you live in the desert, don't bother trying this one. Learn from my mistakes. And I also had a regular tub on the ground, and that one decomposed so much better than these spinning bins in the desert. These take a lot longer to yield compost, and like, again, maybe I need to try this in a humid climate, but I just think that in a regular compost pile, stuff sits there and it breaks down really, really nicely, and then you spin it around. This one, you spin it, maybe you just shouldn't spin it as often, but I found it took so long for this stuff to break down. Even considering the dryness, I think it would have taken a long time either way. Number 5 is vermicomposting or worm composting, worm bins, you might also hear them as. This is something that I have never done as an adult. We had a worm bin when we were kids, and that's the extent of it. I didn't really partake in it. I just thought the worms were cool. Again, it was Ohio. Like, it's so easy to compost in Ohio, so it's hard to judge how well these would work in other regions. Here's the gist of composting with worms. This one's really cool because it requires little effort on your part because the worms are doing all the work. They eat most of the food and then poop it out, making fertilizer. This type of composting can be done on any scale. They make like really nice home vermicomposting that you can literally have in your kitchen because done correctly, it shouldn't smell. So this can be done indoors. It can be done outdoors in a renter-friendly way, something that's removable, or you could set up a big, large-scale thing. If you have a larger yard, you have more time, you want to put more effort into it. But of course, now you have to be responsible for worms, and you don't want to harm them. I hope not. So some things to consider here is you can't actually compost citrus, onions, or other high acidic foods because those can be very toxic to the worms. You also want to make sure that they are in the right like temperature, the right moisture levels, all that sort of stuff so that they don't die. Pros to this one is that this can be done in any sort of size house, from a small apartment, like a studio, a regular home, a home with a yard, etc. This can be another great option for renters. This can be done for low cost as well on a DIY level. I've seen people like drill out 5-gallon buckets and have the different levels that way. So how it's done is there's different levels. The food with the worms, the compost, and then I think there's like a drainage section. I'm not really sure exactly. I'll insert some photos here for you. So you can DIY this for cheap or lower cost. And of course, another pro is the worms do most of the work for you. Now, the cons, of course, if you do buy a fancy nice one and like the bigger they get, the more expensive they get. Not everything can be composted in a vermicompost bin, so that's unfortunate. It can take a while to do this properly and learn how to work with your worms. And this is also not just a set it and forget it compost. Despite the worms doing work for you, you have to put in extra time and care to make sure that the worms aren't getting harmed. Though that extra work is not that difficult. Okay, let's move on to number 6, another one that I have not done but I have seen done a lot on the internet, and that is Bokashi composting. This is another great composting options for apartment dwellers, if you will. So Bokashi composting is essentially fermenting your food waste. Sounds really gross and it sounds like it would smell, right? But it doesn't. So you layer your compostable materials, so like your paper, your lettuce, your tomato scraps, whatever, with the Bokashi inoculant. It has to be done in a very specific bucket. So it can be done on your own. You can DIY this, but it might take a little bit more effort and planning instead of just like drilling holes in an old tub. So this inoculant is usually wheat germ, wheat bran, or sawdust. So if you're familiar with composting toilets, it kind of works in the same way, at least to me. That's what it sounds like when I read about Bokashi. The inoculant is then combined with molasses, as well as you have to add microorganisms to your mixture, and then the microorganisms feed off of the molasses. And then after doing that, a liquid is produced, and this byproduct is also a fertilizer. So Bokashi buckets, like if you buy an actual like branded one, it comes with a little spigot that you can drain the liquid off of, and then you can use that liquid to water your plants, and it's like water plus fertilizer. And this is easily, so far, the fastest way that you can compost, because this will give you a result within 10 days, which is pretty cool. Most of those other composting methods we previously talked about can take weeks, months, potentially potentially years, as I saw in Las Vegas, to get yieldable compost. But it's not really compost. It's just fermented waste. So when you add it to your garden or you add it to like your soil in a potted plant, it will continue to break down and compost in that soil. It also differs in that it actually requires no oxygen. In fact, you're supposed to introduce as little oxygen as possible. Sorry about the helicopter. So the bucket should only be open to add new materials and then closed very quickly, sealed off, and then don't bother looking in there and introducing more oxygen. So again, this is a very low effort way to compost. And if you want to learn more about Bokashi composting, as well as just composting in general, you can check out the Compost Fairy on TikTok. I will leave their handle down below. Pros to Bokashi composting: another great renter-friendly option that can be done in very close quarters. Of course, you can do this, you know, if you live in a house and you own your home too. The liquid byproduct creates extra fertilizer, so you're getting the liquid fertilizer and the solid fertilizer. And it's a very quick turnaround if you're looking for very quick compost. Cons are that it does require a very specific setup, so while it can be done DIY'd, it's a little more difficult. And if you are buying something brand new, like a brand new Bokashi setup, it can get expensive, as well as since you do have to buy the inoculant over and over again, that can get expensive too. But nothing will be quite as expensive as number 7. That's the Lomi. This is another composting method that I am very familiar with now. But this is also, like I hinted at with the Bokashi, if you thought the Bokashi was fast, the Lomi is even faster. The Lomi will get you usable compost within 12 to 24 hours. But like Bokashi, Lomi also doesn't produce legitimate compost. It's similar to Bokashi, but different. So Bokashi ferments your waste, and then you're left with fermented waste. The Lomi is essentially a dehydrator. So you're not left with actual compost, you're left with dehydrated food scraps that will continue to compost as you add them to your garden or whatever you're adding them to. The cool thing about Lomi is it's essentially a commercial composting machine, which means that you can add bioplastics to it safely. So you can add bioplastics to any of these other ones as well. It might not be the right conditions. Bioplastics typically have to be heated up in order to be broken down all the way, as well as some bioplastics do contain petroleum-based plastics. They are not 100% plant-based, which is very big greenwashing, and unfortunate that companies do that, but it does happen. Lomi is very easy to use. It doesn't require really any thinking or effort on your part. You just dump your stuff into the bucket, hit the button, and it composts for you. Composts. I need to keep doing that. Great for small spaces, for renters. Like I said, we're in an RV, so this is great for mobile living as well. So I made a full video on the Lomi if you want to learn more about the specific product. Is it greenwashing? How does it actually work? And what you should do with your Lomi compost after it's done in the cycle. Since moving into the RV, this has been the only way we have composted. 5 months now as I'm filming this. One of the biggest downsides to the Lomi is that since it is a piece of tech, it can malfunction. Unlike other you can malfunction. You can have to troubleshoot other composting methods. Nothing as major as a Lomi. Like, we've had issues with the air filter, we've had issues with wires, we've had issues with it clogging. It's not quite as easy as they make it seem. So pros to the Lomi: it's modern, it's sleek, it looks very nice on your shelf as opposed to like a bucket of worms or a bucket of fermenting food. It does look better. Great for small spaces, renters, for people who don't have a lot of time to compost, so not just renters. It uses no more energy than an average home appliance, so something like a refrigerator or a microwave. I think it uses considerably less than a refrigerator, actually. There's little to no smell. I'm very smell sensitive. I have migraines, so I don't think Dan notices it as much as me, but I definitely notice it, but it doesn't bother me. It's very easy to use and operate, generally, as well as it can easily and safely break down bioplastics, which is really, really cool. Cons: it is very expensive. This is not a budget option at all. I'm not sure how much it costs off the top of my head, so I'll put the price right here. Good news is they run sales a lot, so follow me on Instagram. I try to share every time they have a sale because I know people are interested in the Lomi. They do sales for like the 4th of July, for Plastic Free July, for Earth Day, for Christmas, Thanksgiving, Black Friday, whatever. Yeah, I'll see if they're actually running a discount right now, and I'll put it in the caption for you. Again, it's a machine. Machines can break and malfunction, which is really unfortunate. It also requires filters. It's just charcoal. So like the charcoal can be composted in the Lomi, which is cool, but that's another added cost that you have to buy every 6 months to a year or so. I haven't bought any since using it. Maybe I should. It does require electricity to run, so that can add cost to your electric bill as well, though very little. Depends on how much you use it. We only run it once a week or less, and we don't have an electric bill. We're at a campground, so we just pay a flat rate. So I can't tell you exactly how much our electric bill has gone up. Maybe I'll run an experiment again this winter at my mom's, use the Lomi, and see if it actually does affect her electric bill. It does not yield true compost, which is unfortunate, but it will still continue to break down in your garden. I am going to be making a full video on my thoughts on the Lomi after using it full time. From March to about November is about the time frame that we'll be using it full time, and I'll give you my full thoughts in that video on if I like it, is it worth it, and so forth. All right, number 8 is an app/website called Share Waste. I love this option because this is great if you live in an apartment or you're a renter and you don't have any of these other options. Like, you can't use any of these other options for whatever it may be because you don't have the space or the time or the energy or the money. This is another great free option as well. You simply just give your food waste to someone else and they will compost it. This is especially great for people who don't have curbside composting. So you just simply get on the app or website, you search your region, and then it'll show you where you can go drop off your compost. This does require you to drop it off yourself, so you do need a car or some way to transport it. But this is a great way to make friends, build a community, learn people in your area, as well as still keep your food out of the landfill without actually having to have a compost set up for yourself. So pros, the app and the website are totally free. And it's a great way to connect with like-minded folks, and it doesn't require any space, time, or energy on your part. Well, a little bit of time. Because one of the cons is it does require you to drop off the compost, which if it's on your way to work or it's on your way to run errands, cool, it's not really out of your way. But if it is out of your way, it can consume some of your time and money in the form of gas. Again, just like with curbside composting, it's not always an option depending on your region. Even in Las Vegas is huge. There was nobody on Share Waste. While there may be people who accepted compost, like local farms and individuals and stuff, those people weren't on the app Share Waste or the website, so it does require people to register to be like receiver of compost. There's some human error there, and it can be difficult to arrange mutual times for drop off and pickup. Similar to that, number 9 is to just check your local farm. You could just simply reach out to them. Like, for example, in Las Vegas, nobody was on Share Waste. I could reach out to these farms and say, hey, do you compost? Are you willing to take my compost because I don't want it to go to the landfill and I don't have the space or time to compost? Perhaps they'll do it. So this will require you to, call around to local farms and orchards and other things like that to see if they will actually take it and that sort of stuff. But it can still yield the same success. This is essentially the same thing as Share Waste, except for you're doing the work of finding the people who will take the compost. Same things apply. You have to actually meet with somebody, so it can be a little bit out of your way. So the pros and cons are essentially the same. I'm not going to go over them again. Another similar one to that, number 10, is to just find a friend Bringing it back to Las Vegas, one of my friends who was, I was roping her into being more eco-conscious. She's like, I really want to compost, but she was in an apartment and wanted a budget option. So whenever we would meet up, she would just bring me her frozen compost and then I would add it to my bins. So that could be the same thing. If you have a friend that that composts, ask them if they can take your compost for you. There's already a system set up. We don't need to have, multiple Lomis or multiple Bokashi bins. It's saving stuff from being created, saving stuff from the landfill, and a great excuse to go hang out with your friends. Once again, this is pretty much the same pros and cons as with Share Waste and just finding a local farm. It might require you to drive out of your way, but it can be totally free and easy and requires no work on your part for the actual composting. Number 11 is a community garden. I really hope that community gardens also compost. I mean, why not just set up a little compost pile at the garden? So if you already know there's a community garden, they probably have compost as well, and they're probably also willing to take compost that isn't necessarily generated from the garden. Like if you have compost from your home, they'll probably be willing to take it as well, because at the end of the day, compost will turn into fertilizer, which will be a great benefit to the community garden. So the pros here, again, it can be a free way to compost because community gardens are free. If they're not, what a scam. It's a great way to make friends and connect with like-minded people. This is probably very common in bigger cities. I know big cities are pretty known for their community gardens. I know we have one here. There's one in Coeur d'Alene. There was a lot of community gardens in Vegas. So around, again, this is something you can just Google or go to Ecosia and search like Las Vegas Community Garden, Spokane Community Garden, and see if there's anything near you. And then from there, you'll still have to investigate. Does this community garden compost? If not, maybe you can start one. Another great benefit to using a community garden / their compost is you can get free produce. What a great benefit. Cons: small cities and towns probably don't have one. Still worth it to look into though. It might take a bit of work to find somebody, at least all the searching on Google and all the calling around. And again, it does require you to actually drive to drop it off. So if you're already going to the community garden, it's not really a waste of anybody's time or money. But if it is out of your way to go drop off the compost at random times, it could be a little bit time consuming and use some gas money. And number 12 is to feed it to your animals. This could be livestock, like if you have goats, chickens, sheep, pigs, cows, whatever it may be. Make sure that it is safe for them, of course. Don't feed them stuff that's not going to be safe for them. But they can do all the composting work for you. Not to mention they're also stomping it into the ground. They're also pooping in the compost, making it extra rich in fertilizer. So you can throw your compost into their pen, or you can have a compost area and then just set them loose in your compost once a day for a little special snack time or whatever. This is just a little bonus tip. You can feed a lot of your food waste to your dogs if you have a dog. Of course, this depends if your dog is picky or not. I get that feedback all the time. It's like, my dog's too picky for that. Sorry, my dog will eat anything. If we have floppy carrots, floppy celery, carrot ends, the peels of beets, cauliflower stems, broccoli stems, the ends of asparagus. Make sure it's safe. Do your research, but our dog helps us prevent a lot of food waste as well. So there you have it. 12 ways that you can compost. And I guarantee there's a way to compost for everyone. I hope that one of these works for you, no matter your income, how much time you have, how much space you have. Obviously, I can't force anybody to do anything, but like I said in the beginning, this is easily one of the best things that we can do for the planet because our landfills are running out of space and sending food waste to the landfill is releasing greenhouse gases. Again, check out that full video on why food waste is so bad. I just think it's really cool to imagine that all 16,000 of us started composting. How big of an impact will that make? And not only us as individuals, but our families. Like I taught my mom how to compost, or just told her to start composting. And my mom can tell her friends, and those friends can tell more friends, and then just really just has a butterfly effect. Spread the word, share this video with others, inspire others to start composting. Start composting. I think that would be great of you to do. And if you have any composting questions, again, let me know down below. I would love to make more composting videos this winter. And if there's more ways that you compost that I didn't mention, leave them down below because I want to expand this list and make composting easy and accessible for everybody. Let's also just keep putting pressure on our governments to make composting mandatory, make composting easy for us. But again, thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time, especially if you made it all the way to the end. Next week, we're talking about more ways to conserve energy, a topic that I haven't talked about like since 2020. So long overdue video. I'll see you next week. Until then though, remember that your small actions make a big difference in the long run. Bye guys. 2, I needed something that would be, I guess I didn't. I don't know what I'm saying. Oh my gosh. Can you tell I have a headache? A migraine. And I am going to be making a... gosh, it got so bright. I'll see you then. Until then, though, remember that your small actions make a big difference. I did it. I was thinking really hard about saying it wrong, and I almost said it wrong again. Goodbye.